Have you ever wondered why the most powerful people in the world seem to live by completely different rules? You're scrolling through the news and another bombshell drops. Epstein files, flight logs, names you recognize, politicians, billionaires, celebrities, academics. People who lecture you about morality on television. People who write laws. People who shape culture. And then what happens? The story gets buried. Investigations stall. Witnesses die under mysterious circumstances. The public gets distracted by the next manufactured outrage. Meanwhile, you, an ordinary person, would face immediate consequences for far lesser transgressions. But they continue, protected, insulated, untouchable. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this pattern 200 years ago. The German philosopher didn't just observe elite behavior, he explained the philosophical mechanism that allows the powerful to indulge their darkest impulses while maintaining a veneer of respectability. Today, we're going to explore Schopenhauer's brutal insights into human nature, the psychology of power, and why the elite class operates in a moral universe entirely separate from yours. Because once you understand this framework, every scandal, every cover-up, every unpunished crime among the powerful will make perfect sense. And you'll never look at authority the same way again. Schopenhauer's central philosophical concept was the will, an irrational, blind force that drives all living things towards satisfaction and survival. He wrote, "Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." What does this mean? Your desires aren't chosen. They emerge from something deeper, something primal. The desire for sex, dominance, pleasure, control. These aren't moral failures. They're the fundamental drives of existence. Now, here's where it gets dark. Schopenhauer argued that civilization is just a thin layer of restraint over these primal urges. For most people, consequences enforce that restraint. You want something inappropriate? Society punishes you. Legal system, social shame, career destruction. But what happens when someone has enough power to remove those consequences? Look at the Epstein case. We're not talking about a lone predator. We're talking about a network. Private islands, private jets, a systematic operation that involved some of the most powerful people on the planet. These weren't people acting on impulse. This was infrastructure, resources, lawyers, NDAs, political connections, media influence. Schopenhauer would tell you this isn't surprising, it's inevitable. When you remove external restraints on the will, it expresses itself in its raw, unfiltered form. The question isn't, why did this happen? The question is, why would you expect anything different? Most people suppress their darkest desires because they fear consequences. The elite suppress nothing because they've engineered a world where consequences don't apply to them. Schopenhauer was obsessed with the gap between appearance and reality. He wrote extensively about how humans are masters of self-deception and social performance. Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. Think about what this means in the context of power. The average person sees wealthy elites through a carefully constructed image, philanthropy, charity galas, TED Talks about changing the world, social media posts about justice and equality. But Schopenhauer understood that public virtue is often the mask worn by private vice. Consider the Epstein network. These weren't people hiding in shadows. They were celebrities at Davos. They were university donors. They had foundations. They received awards. They shaped policy. Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, numerous academics and scientists, people whose public image was built on respectability, achievement, and social contribution. And all the while, there was another life, another set of behaviors, another moral framework operating in private that contradicted everything they claimed publicly. Schopenhauer called this the duplicity of human nature. We're capable of holding two completely contradictory self-images simultaneously, the philanthropist by day, the predator by night, and genuinely believing both personas are authentic. Why? Because the will doesn't care about consistency, it cares about satisfaction, and the human mind is remarkably good at constructing narratives that justify whatever the will demands. The elite don't see themselves as hypocrites. They see themselves as operating in a different sphere where conventional morality simply doesn't apply. Schopenhauer would argue this isn't even conscious, it's how power restructures perception itself. Here's where Schopenhauer gets truly uncomfortable. He believed that humans aren't equal in their intellectual and moral capacities, and that those differences create fundamentally different lived experiences of reality. The common man is not concerned with truth, nor with the exact comprehension of things, but wants merely to be authorized in his opinions. Now, Schopenhauer wasn't endorsing this hierarchy. He was describing what he observed. But here's the implication. If you genuinely believe you're intellectually or morally superior to others, you begin to see them as means rather than ends. Look at how the Epstein operation functioned. The victims weren't recruited from elite circles. They were working-class girls, vulnerable, often from broken homes, no social capital, no powerful connections. Why them? Because in the psychology of the predatory elite, these aren't fully realized human beings. They're resources, objects, tools for satisfaction. Schopenhauer would explain this through his concept of compassion, or rather, the absence of it. Compassion requires seeing yourself in another person, recognizing shared humanity, shared vulnerability. But when someone has spent their entire life in rooms where power is concentrated, where everyone speaks the same language, where everyone has influence, they develop what psychologists now call empathy gaps. They literally cannot imagine what it's like to be powerless. They can't conceive of a world where you don't have lawyers, fixers, political connections, where you can't make problems disappear. And when you combine that empathy gap with the raw force of unconstrained will, with desires that society condemns but power enables, you get systems of exploitation that operate for decades without consequences. Because to the perpetrators, this isn't even exploitation, it's just the natural order. The strong take, the weak serve. Morality is for people who lack options. Schopenhauer had a deeply cynical view of institutions. He wrote, "Every nation ridicules other nations, and all are right." What he meant was that institutions don't exist to enforce truth or justice. They exist to maintain power structures, and the people who run institutions are themselves subject to the same will-driven impulses as everyone else. Now think about what happened with Epstein. This wasn't a failure of institutions. This was institutions working exactly as designed. Epstein was convicted in 2008, served 13 months in a private wing of a county jail, work release 6 days a week. This was for charges involving dozens of underage victims. Who arranged that deal? Alexander Acosta, then U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, later Trump's Secretary of Labor. He later claimed he was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. The FBI had evidence, the police had evidence, victims came forward repeatedly, and yet the system consistently protected the predator. Why? Because everyone involved in those institutions knew that touching Epstein meant touching his network, and his network included people who could destroy careers, manipulate investigations, control media narratives. Schopenhauer would tell you this is the fundamental nature of power protecting itself. Institutions aren't neutral arbiters, they're extensions of the will of whoever controls them. The prosecutors had to work within a system. The investigators had bosses. The journalists had editors and advertisers. Everyone had mortgages, families, futures. And so the machine continues, not because of some grand conspiracy, but because institutional self-preservation aligns with protecting the powerful. The path of least resistance is always to let things slide when investigating them would burn the entire system. Schopenhauer wrote about the world as representation. The idea that reality is filtered through perception and perception can be manipulated. All truth passes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as being self-evident. But what if truth never reaches that third stage? What if it gets stuck in stage one forever? Look at how the Epstein story has been handled in media and public discourse. When the 2019 arrest happened, it dominated headlines. Then he died in custody under impossible circumstances. Cameras malfunctioned, guards fell asleep, protocols weren't followed. The official story? Suicide. The obvious questions? Are you serious? And then what happened? The story faded. New scandals emerged. Political theater, culture war distractions, TikTok trends. By the time Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted in 2021, most people had moved on. The client list? The full flight logs? The videos that were supposedly recovered from his properties? Still sealed, still classified, still under investigation. Schopenhauer would recognize this pattern instantly. The powerful don't suppress information through crude censorship. They drown it in noise. They create so much competing content, so much manufactured outrage, that even explosive revelations get lost in the chaos. You're not stupid for forgetting about Epstein. Your attention is the most fought-over resource on the planet, and the people who benefit from you not paying attention have unlimited resources to deploy. The files that do come out? They're released on Friday afternoons before holiday weekends. They're reported in technical language that makes your eyes glaze over. They're framed as conspiracy theory material that only crazy people obsess over. And slowly, incrementally, the story dies. Not because it's not true, but because maintaining attention on uncomfortable truths requires sustained effort that most people can't afford to give. Meanwhile, the system continues. New Epsteins emerge. Different names, same structure. Because nothing fundamentally changed. Here's something Schopenhauer understood that most people miss. Evil doesn't require evil people. It requires normal people making rational, self-interested decisions. Compassion is the basis of morality, and its absence is the basis of complicity. Think about everyone who enabled Epstein. The pilots who flew the planes, the staff who worked on the island, the lawyers who drafted NDAs, the accountants who managed the money, the PR people who managed his image. Were they all monsters? Probably not. They were people with jobs, mortgages, families to feed, and they made a calculation, my comfort and security are worth more than whatever I'm choosing not to see. Schopenhauer would call this the will to life overriding moral consideration. When your survival depends on not asking questions, you become remarkably good at not asking questions. The assistant who books the flights doesn't ask why a 60-year-old man needs to fly teenage girls to a private island. The lawyer who writes the settlement doesn't ask why there are so many settlements. The journalist who kills the story tells themselves it wasn't quite ready for publication. Each person makes a small compromise, and those small compromises create the infrastructure that allows massive evil to function smoothly. This is how systems of exploitation become normalized, not through active participation, but through passive enablement, not through agreement, but through silence. And the elite understand this perfectly. They don't need everyone to be corrupt, they just need everyone to value their own position more than they value truth. And in a precarious economy where good jobs are scarce, that's not a hard calculation to exploit. So what's the solution? Schopenhauer was pessimistic, but he believed in one thing, the possibility of seeing through illusion to reality. The first 40 years of life give us the text. The next 30 supply the commentary on it. What he meant was that maturity brings clarity. You see patterns, you recognize performance, you stop believing the stories power tells about itself. The Epstein case isn't an aberration, it's a window A rare moment where the curtain slips and you see how power actually operates, not through law or merit or democracy, but through networks of mutual benefit and protection. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every philanthropic gesture looks like reputation laundering. Every institutional investigation looks like controlled opposition. Every media narrative looks like distraction. Does this make you cynical? Maybe, but Schopenhauer would argue it makes you free. Free from the illusion that the system is designed to protect you. Free from the belief that justice will inevitably prevail. Free from the comfortable lie that powerful people are powerful because they're good. The elite will continue to hide their dark desires. They have the resources, the connections, the infrastructure. This won't change. But you don't have to participate in the illusion. You don't have to believe the performance. You don't have to let the story die just because they want it to. Schopenhauer's philosophy isn't about changing the world. It's about seeing it clearly. And sometimes, clarity is the only power you have. So here's what I want you to ask yourself. When was the last time you looked away from something because it was easier than confronting it? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. We all participate in this system to some degree. Not at the level of Epstein's network, obviously, but in the small compromises, the things we choose not to see, the questions we choose not to ask. Maybe it's at work. You know something unethical is happening, but saying something would cost you politically, so you stay quiet. Maybe it's in your social circle. Someone says something racist, sexist, or cruel, but they're powerful, popular, connected. So you laugh along or change the subject. Maybe it's in consumption. You know your phone was made by exploited labor. You know fast fashion destroys lives, but convenience wins. Schopenhauer isn't asking you to be a hero. He's asking you to be honest about what you're willing to tolerate for comfort. The reason the Epstein network could operate for decades isn't just because powerful people are corrupt. It's because thousands of ordinary people made small decisions to enable, ignore, or forget. And those small decisions add up to a system where consequences don't exist for certain people. You can't change that system alone, but you can refuse to participate in the illusion. You can refuse to let the story die. You can refuse to pretend that what happened was somehow isolated or exceptional, because it wasn't. Epstein is dead, but the structure that protected him is still intact. The same lawyers are still practicing. The same investigators are still investigating. The same media is still controlling narratives. The client list is still sealed. The videos are still hidden. And somewhere, right now, another network is operating with the same confidence that consequences don't apply to people with enough power. Schopenhauer would tell you that this is the world. This is what power looks like when masks slip. The question isn't whether this is true. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is whether you're willing to see it, and, more importantly, whether you're willing to remember it when the next distraction comes along. Because the powerful aren't afraid of exposure. They're afraid of sustained attention. They know the cycle. Scandal breaks, outrage peaks, then fatigue sets in, then distraction, then memory fades. Your refusal to forget, that's the only power you have. Not to bring them down, not to see justice served, but to refuse to participate in collective amnesia. Drop a comment if this resonates. What's the most disturbing part of the Epstein case that everyone seems to have forgotten? Let's keep the conversation alive. And remember, in Schopenhauer's philosophy, pessimism isn't despair. It's seeing clearly. It's refusing comfortable illusions. The elite will keep hiding their dark desires, but you don't have to pretend you don't see it. Thanks for watching.